Israel has paused to remember one of the darkest days in its history, the October 7 Hamas terrorist attacks, which has led to the nation's war in Gaza. The surprise Hamas assault and its following rampage left an estimated 1,200 people dead and a further 250 people taken into Gaza as hostages. 1 year on, and Israelis have marked the day with ceremonies, vigils and protests. Hundreds gathered at the site of the Nova Music Festival to remember. Others marched in protest against their own government as Israelis around the world, including here in Australia, reflect on that catastrophic day. IDF forces have intensified bombardments of Gaza and southern Lebanon. We'll have the latest on the widening war with our correspondents shortly, but we start tonight on how Australian Israelis reflected on the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust.
As the sun rose over Bondi Beach, Sydney's Jewish diaspora gathered to remember the more than 1,200 lives lost 1 year ago.
Families were burnt alive. Infants were slain in their cots. Mothers and fathers were executed in front of their offspring. No one was spared.
366 days since Hamas-led terrorists went on a rampage through southern Israel, a survivor shared her story of horror with the crowd.
In the past year, we've seen and experienced such a darkness and such evil that we didn't think that no longer existed. But we also rediscovered how special and unique our people is.
Jewish people are coming together across the country, sharing in their grief and praying for the safe return of the 101 hostages still held by Hamas.
One of the hardest parts about today is it's difficult for us to move on and resume normal life with the hostages still in captivity.
Preparations for Commemorations have been underway for days, with members of the Jewish community in Melbourne making lanterns for their memorial.
We've asked them all to adopt a victim who they will make a lantern commemorating.
He's somebody's son, somebody's grandson.
I try to create light in a place of darkness. So we are very fragile and broken in the community here.
The Jewish community did not stand alone, many congregating on the lawns of Parliament for a Christian organised event.
I simply wanted to do something in some little way to commemorate it and add my voice against anti-Semitism.
I've had anti-Semitism directed at me over the last year in increasing variety and increasing number.
Today I couldn't be alone. It's good to see your community around you and to realise you're not alone.
Politicians also present, calling for an end to a reported rise in anti-Semitism over the past 12 months.
Sorrow knows no boundaries and recognises no differences. The number of civilians who have lost their lives is a devastating tragedy.
Rallies and vigils have also been planned around the country in support of Palestine and Lebanon, a move Jewish leaders have labelled insensitive and inappropriate.
We simply ask these people to leave this one day alone, to let this day be a day of mourning and commemoration for the Jewish people and the decent people of this country.
Despite many calling for peace, with no end in sight for the conflict in the Middle East, unity on home shores seems a distant prospect. Cyan Valance, ABC News.
And Cyan Valance will join us shortly, where she is attending Melbourne's Jewish community, which has been joined by state and federal political leaders to mark the anniversary of the attack. She will join us from that vigil shortly. Well, hundreds of Israelis have returned to the site of the Nova Music Festival to pay tribute and mourn the hundreds of victims. Israeli survivors who lived through the horror were overcome with grief as family and friends reflected on the many lives lost.
Israelis mark 1 year since the country was changed forever. At the Nova Music Festival 1 year ago, 364 would be killed, a further 40 taken hostage in the Hamas terror attack. Bullet holes still mark the trees.
Our camp was like around here.
Survivors of the festival attack, like photographer Shai Klein, are still dealing with that day.
The only exposure to gunfire in my life is Call of Duty and movies, like many people my age in North America. So when I heard the sound, right away the first thought in my head was gun, danger, shooting.
Hundreds gathered at the site of the massacre to remember those killed, some overcome with anguish. Elsewhere, there's fury at the inability of Israel's government to secure the release of hostages taken a year ago.
We are standing today after a whole year have passed, and they are still there.
With anti-government protests right outside the Israeli Prime Minister's residence. In Jerusalem, images of the hostages light up the old city walls.
We saw the whole, the lights with all the pictures, and it was just so hard to even, comprehend that it's been a year, and we just want to bring them home already to their families.
This is a nation still coming to terms with tragedy. Alison Horn, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Well, Melbourne's Jewish community has been joined by state and federal political leaders to mark the first anniversary of the attack. Reporter Cyan Valance is at the vigil and she joins us now. Good evening, Cyan. Can you take us through how those victims are being remembered?
Good evening, Kath. Well, every single individual is being remembered here with a lantern. Every lantern has been made by community members and school children and bears the names and stories of one of the 1,200 people who died or the 250 who were taken hostage. What's happened is as the sun goes down, they'll be carrying the lanterns through to the building, lit up in their memory and to show that their lights cannot be extinguished.
Every day since October 7 has felt like October 7, and it's been so devastating that there's not even really been time to mourn. It feels that all of us here are still living through a very real-life tragedy with over 100 hostages still being held captive by Hamas. We hope and pray that they are alive, so it feels very much like we are still in the middle of this terrible trauma.
Cyan, what's happening after the lantern procession?
Well, there'll be a ceremony inside with community members sharing to a crowd that includes Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, the Premier Jacinta Allen, the opposition leader John Pesutto and the former Premier Daniel Andrew, amongst around 7,000 community members. Now, the location of this ceremony has been kept a secret and security is high due to a rise in anti-Semitism over the past year. So not only is there a large police presence, there's private security guards, even a metal detector. As people come together, they also want to feel safe as they remember the deadliest day for the Jewish community since the Holocaust.
Cyan Valance, thank you. Well, Middle East correspondent Alison Horn is in Jerusalem and says the mood there is sombre.
A lot of grief and a lot of pain, Kath, but I'd also say a fair bit of anger as well, particularly from the families of hostages that are still being held captive in Gaza. We've seen protests in the last few hours here where I am outside the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem. Anger that the government is still not willing or able to make a ceasefire and hostage release deal to have those hostages freed from Hamas captivity, even as new polling here in Israel suggests that an overwhelming majority of Israelis want the war in Gaza to end.
So, Alison, I mean, as we've been reporting, Israel has stepped up its bombardment of northern Gaza as well as Lebanon. Can you take us through the latest operations?
Yes, so we're seeing in Gaza and Lebanon the IDF continuing to advance with its military operations there. I think what it really signifies is how intractable this war is, because It was at the start of this year that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared over and over again that Israel was within reach of victory within Gaza. And 10 months later, it's clear that that statement just wasn't true. Not only that, but the fighting has expanded. Israel now in this mass Middle East war with fronts in Lebanon, against Iraq and Syria, and the possibility of escalation with the major superpower Iran. There is no end to this fighting in sight.
Alison Horn, many thanks for the update. Well, on the anniversary, the IDF has launched a new offensive in northern Gaza. The army has also opened a new front in Lebanon against Hezbollah, which has been trading fire with Israel since the war in Gaza began.
On the move again, fleeing south. Another desperate search for safety after Israel ordered the evacuation of a refugee camp in Gaza's north.
We left and now we don't know where to go. Schools, shelter centres, health centres, no one knows where to go.
This is the 12th time Samira and her children have been displaced in the last year. A period of unimaginable suffering, according to the United Nations.
It is difficult to convey the full extent of the violence that has been perpetrated against the Palestinian people. I saw children and adults die in front of me with the most horrific injuries.
Israel maintains it's precisely striking targets in Gaza, but the Hamas-run government says 26 people were killed in the latest airstrikes on a mosque and a school. Attacks inside Israel are also continuing. In the city of Beersheba, a stabbing and shooting left one woman dead and 10 injured. Police say they're treating it as a terrorist incident. Beirut's southern suburbs also came under renewed fire. Israel says its jets hit the intelligence headquarters and weapons storage facilities of the Iran-backed group Hezbollah. The Prime Minister praised his troops for their efforts in this multi-front war.
A year ago, we suffered a terrible blow. In the past 12 months, we are changing the reality completely. The whole world is astonished by the blows that you inflict on our enemies.
As the strikes intensify, the Lebanese government estimates 1.2 million people have been displaced. The destruction forcing the country to abandon the start of the new school year, as those left homeless seek shelter and safety.
It's impossible to open public schools. Hundreds of them have been transformed into safe havens.
As bombs continue to fall, the thought of going back to school is likely the last thing on students' minds. Eric Dworchek, ABC News, Beirut.
Well, the first repatriation flight carrying hundreds of Australians fleeing the conflict in Lebanon is due to touch down in Sydney this evening. Our reporter Ethan Ricks is at Sydney Airport and joins us now. Ethan, what do you know about this flight that's on its way back to Australia?
Well, Kath, the first of those two repatriation flights, which have been organised by the Australian government, helping Australians and their immediate family members flee Lebanon, taking them to Cyprus, and eventually here at Sydney's International Airport, is due to arrive in over an hour's time now, just slightly delayed. But as I talk to you right now, one of the commercial flights that came from Qatar, but was also carrying some Lebanese Australians, just arrived a short time ago and have run straight into the arms of some of their family members, some of the people who I spoke to as well, saying that they brought their mother and their father over so they could see and witness the birth of one of their recently about to give birth to some children. So they're bringing them over here and making sure they're safe as well. So there's a lot of emotions here at the moment, but that is not one of the repatriation flights that has been organised by the Australian government. The first one is carrying around 350 Australians and their immediate family members. That's due to arrive just after 7 o'clock tonight. Then there's another one that will land here at Sydney's International Airport much later tonight, carrying more than 200 Australians. So that's around 900 Australians that have now been flown out by the Australian government out of Lebanon, who went to, first they went to Cyprus, and then they'll eventually make their way. Some of them will go to Doha and eventually make their way here to Sydney and then go on to their different states and territories where they're from. At the moment, we know more than 3,700 Australians in Lebanon have requested information about flights out of Lebanon from the Australian government, and we know a majority of those are interested in leaving the country at the moment. But we're still waiting here for that flight. It's about more than an hour away now, and there's already been a lot of emotion as some of those commercial flights arrive here in Sydney out of Lebanon in just a few minutes ago. Kath?
I'm sure. Ethan Ricks at Sydney Airport, thank you.